Hello, and welcome to our commentary on the Torah portion Bereshit. I am Steve Okonola. And the way this is set up is that we have 54 Torah portions, which means we have 54 sections of the 5 books of Moses, which is known as the Torah, which we go through by reading a section on every Sabbath day. Now, typically, we will go through the whole Torah within a year. Now, 54 portions, that means we have more portions than we have weeks in a year. Sometimes some portions are grouped together, and these are then read in one go. In the days of Yeshua, this is how it was done. Every Saturday, which is Sabbath, the portion was read from the Torah, and to go with that, we had a portion from the prophets known as the Haftarah. Now, we will only be dealing with the Torah in this commentary, and we'll be looking at a Hebrew word here and there. We know the accounts of creation very well. The Torah portion, Bereshit, it starts chapter 1, Genesis, verse 1, and goes to chapter 6, verse 8. And it starts with, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. We probably have read this dozens of times. And I believe that Genesis is not only speaking of the created world, the universe and the waters and darkness and light and Adam and Eve and the animals. I think that Genesis already contains the central theme of the Bible, which is salvation. Now, how do I conclude that this is the case? We'll be trying to underline and highlight some aspects as we go along. Now, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Says in the Hebrew, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And of course, we know that the Bible was written in Hebrew. The King James Version, the one from which I'm reading right now, is a translation. So, in the Hebrew Bible, the wording in the beginning is Bereshit, right? So God created is bara, and if I'm to take the Hebrew word bara, which means to create, now there are many ways in which a man or woman may do something, by lifting up, by building, by putting something together. But the word bara in the Hebrew means to create and is reserved solely for God. When you see bara in the Bible, this means that it is attributed to God creating something. It is something only God can do, right? Now, take note of these letters. That's a bet, a resh, and an aleph. This is the word to create, and we will see it right in the second place in the Hebrew Bible, Bereshit bara. But I find it very interesting that the word Bereshit in itself contains these 3 letters, bara. Now, Bereshit is an entirely different word. It means at the beginning, at the head of something. But Bereshit already contains these 3 words, bara. So the Bible starts with the phrase to create. Very interesting, because I believe that God is telling us something about the fallen nature of humanity, His love, how to bring back man in union with Him, and what elements He's using to accomplish that. And the earth was without form and void, is what the Hebrew says, ve'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu, and this is tohu vavohu, that is without form and void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, this phrase was void and without form is found elsewhere in the Bible, and that is in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 4. Let me pull it up quickly. And it says, hold on. So there we have it. It says in verse 22, for my people is foolish. Now, God is speaking of Israel, and we will take a look at the concept of Israel in a minute. They have not known me. They are sottish children, and they have none understanding. They are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge. Now, take note. I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens and the heart, and they had no light. Now, it's the same phrase that we read about, Vehine tovavo, right there, form, without form and void. Tovavo is a phrase used elsewhere in the Bible when it speaks of God's people not knowing about his ways. Now, not knowing about his ways means his people are not instructed in the Torah. What does that mean? Now, Torah, the word Torah is derived from the root word to instruct, right? Yara. This is Yara. This is how you write it out. And Torah is all. Torah are the instructions, right? So Yara and Torah are related. So if you have the teachings, the instructions of God, it means that God is instructing you on how to live, how to do things, how to be a perfect human being in having Yeshua as an example. Okay? Now, when the people of God turn away from this is when the phrase is used in the prophet Jeremiah that the earth was without form and void. Does this make sense? Now, who is this nation which God called out of slavery? That is Israel. Israel probably means nothing more to us than a nation somewhere in the Middle East and a nation which had some dealings with God. Now, in the Hebrew, Israel, hold on, is written thus. Okay. And there are some things we may find when looking at this word, because there are some aspects here which are very straightforward. Now, some people may believe that this is not the right conclusion, because the first element is this yod, which represents masculine, imperfect, third person, right? He did something that is taking place or will take place in the future. So, masculine, he will what? Sar means to rule. El, what? This will mean he will be a prince with God, or he will rule with God, because El is a short form for God. This is a possible meaning. So the nation that was called to be a priesthood for God is Israel. And Israel was entrusted with the Torah, with the teachings. But if Israel deviates from the ways of God, this is when the prophet says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Can you follow? Now, this word darkness, choshech, is the same word that is used for darkness in the episode of the children of Israel being in Egypt and the ninth plague having the punishment of darkness. That's the word choshech in the Hebrew. So there's some spiritual things going on. So this is not just about creating the earth. This is more, well, Genesis is speaking about how God created the earth. But I think very deeply and very convincingly that the Bible is teaching us how God brings about salvation of a fallen human race, of a fallen nation, of people who were entrusted to do good and know his ways, and how they fell from grace, like all humanity has fallen from grace. So darkness was upon the face of the deep, and you have the word tehom, something like abyss or the deep. If you read Revelation and reading that Satan was cast into the abyss or the deep, it's the same idea. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water. So you already have some very concrete themes in the book of Genesis: paradise, fruitfulness, light, rest, darkness, promise, serpent. Things that we are familiar with when it comes to the concept of salvation. And God said, let there be light. So God's remedy for this situation was for there to be light. Okay? Now, light in the book of Proverbs is a description for the Torah. David will also say that the word is a lamp unto my feet, right? And we have the phrase in the book of Proverbs, chapter 6, where it says that the Torah is light. So God's remedy is for people to know his instructions when they fall away from him and be united with him. And God saw that the light was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So he separates. So if there's a chaotic state, what God does is to give instruction and to separate. Now, the separation will be very important before you hear or read of anything being fruitful. Now, I'm not going to go through every sentence. I mean, if we were to go through every word in the Hebrew, we probably will be here for minimum a week, right? This is supposed to be a short commentary on what the book of Genesis is about. Well, what the Torah portion on Bereshit is about. So God will be separating the dry from the waters, and separating the heaven from the earth, and naming things. And then he commands for fruitfulness to come out of what he has created. Now, on a spiritual level, when we are called out of choshech, darkness, we are supposed to bring about fruit for God. But before we can bring about fruit for God, there has to be a separation between darkness and light. And not only is there a separation necessary, we also have to be filled with the Spirit. Now, we had that in the beginning, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The Ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. Ruach is the Spirit of God, and without God's Spirit, without being filled with God's Spirit, we can do nothing. Like Yeshua would say, out of yourselves, you can do nothing. So it is God's Spirit in us that makes us to be fruitful, but being fruitful, like we read in the letter to the Galatians, the fruits of the Spirit come about after we are filled with God's Spirit. So, Bereshit bara, God is creating a new creation in us, and this is the way he goes about it. When he calls us out of darkness, he fills us with his Spirit. He makes known the darkness because he names, the elements. He determines what is good. He gives us his instructions. And we are called to be filled. Now, if we don't fill ourselves, if people only separate themselves from things that are bad, but they don't fill it with the good, then we know what Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 12, that when a demon is cast out of a person, this demon goes through dry places, comes back to his home, finds it empty, swept clean, and then he goes what? He goes and takes 7 demons stronger and much more wicked than he was, or he is, and they occupy the person that he was cast out of. And the state of the person is worse than at the beginning. So it is very necessary not only to be separated, but also to be filled with God's Spirit. And this is basically our main theme in the first chapter of Bereshit. Now, there are many concepts of the lights and the greater lights and the smaller lights, but this is about as far as I would like to go in the first chapter. God blessed them and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the earth. Now, the created man is supposed to have control of his spiritual life. If the spiritual man was a slave to the world or to the ways of wickedness, once he comes into relationship with God, he's filled with the Spirit. There is a separation made, and he has control over the things that once ruled over him. Do you follow? And Bereshit finishes the first chapter with, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good, and the evening and the morning were the sixth day. We will take a short break and take a look at chapter 2 in a minute. So we may say that creation culminates in the creation of man. The purpose of creation was for mankind to be created in the image of God and to have fellowship with God. Now, you will see that in order to know what mankind is about and how to be in a relationship with God, mankind needs instructions, and these instructions are found in the Torah of God. If you look around today, you may discover that many people do not have the same understanding of what Torah is supposed to mean. And it may surprise you that some of your worst religious experiences are found in the confines of those who are supposed to be keeping Torah. And you hear a lot of arguing about which day is the correct day of rest and which calendar is the right calendar to be keeping for the feast days. And do the men have to wear very long beards, or are short beards appropriate? Do the women have to wear dresses, and do we have to investigate everything we are eating to find out if it contains any portion of pork? Now, these are external things. Some of them may have some benefits, but sometimes, or a lot of times, you will find that the spirit behind keeping Torah is not very much in keeping with what God has instructed, which is to walk in love towards one another. So the instruction that mankind needs is to go back to what the Torah actually says: loving God with all your heart, soul, and might, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Where there's love, there's no argument, there's no fighting, there's no trying to be more knowledgeable than your neighbor. So we will see that Adam is given instructions of what to do, being perfectly created. And if we look into this cycle, that when mankind is pulled out of darkness, he is given instructions, just as Adam was given the instruction of what to do in the Garden of Eden. So the perfect man, Adam, also reflects the saved man, which is to know how to behave and how to live in the presence of God. So thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. Now we touched on the concept of bara, create. Now, created, in the Bible, we will find out that God speaks things into existence. He forms, that's the word yatzar. He does something, or he performs a task. But when he creates, it's specifically created by God. Now, we'll find that Adam was created, the heavens and the earth were created, and something else was also created. We touched on this word bara, if you remember. Bara, this word right here, it's written somewhat unintelligibly, but let me try that again. This word bara means that God created something. And it is used for something else, and I find it very interesting. It's used for Adam, once again. It's used for the heavens and the earth, and it's used for, let me pull that up. Now, in the English, it says, and God created great whales. But I highly doubt that this is what the text is saying. In the Hebrew, it says, Vayivra, and here we have it, bara. So God created, Vayivra Elohim, which is God, et hataninim. And this word, translated as great whales, is the same word that is used when Moses and Aaron confront Pharaoh and they throw down their staffs. These turn into snakes, and then Aaron's staff swallows the staffs of the Egyptian magicians, right? So the word that something was swallowed right there was the word taninim, or is the word taninim. Now, the context is when Moses and Aaron confront Pharaoh, it's a spiritual battle. So right at the onset, we see that the taninim was swallowed, and it's a picture of the dragon, of Satan being defeated. So taninim right here, as you can see in the translation here at the bottom, relates to serpent, dragon, or monster, not necessarily whales. So what is God saying here? Vayivra Elohim et taninim. So he's telling us that, well, he created man, he created the heavens and the earth, and he also created whatever is known as hataninim. And I believe this is a relation to the great enemy of God. I think that from the onset on, God is telling us that he has everything under control. That the great enemy of Israel and the great enemy of Yeshua's people, Satan himself, was created by God. This is the conclusion to which I come when I read the Hebrew text. Now, chapter 2 is speaking of Adam being planted in a garden, and he had, in verse 15, an instruction to dress and to keep it. Now, we can go into a long series of translations and word findings, because we have something here. Vayikach Adonai Elohim et ha'adam, well, God took Adam, and vayanichehu, he put him to rest, is the word actually here. Nuach is the root. Began Eden, in the Garden of Eden, leavda, to work the garden, u lishamra, and to keep the garden. Now, I have a Hebrew teacher who explained that actually the word garden is supposed to be masculine. And whatever it was that he had to keep could not have been the garden, since the verb to keep here is in feminine. Now, I don't know where that takes us, but Adam had a purpose in the Garden of Eden, and it was to keep something. Now, we already have the concept of the great serpent or monster or dragon being created. So probably there already was some kind of danger from which Adam was to be protected. Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. So these are the instructions that Adam was given, and it is very, very, very vital that he holds to these instructions, just as it is very vital for the saved person to now walk in the statutes of Yeshua when he's saved. Now, you may hear people say today that once you're saved, you are always saved. And once you are in God's love, nothing furthermore can happen to you, because your salvation is basically a stated thing. But the message of the Bible is that salvation is an ongoing process, and you are constantly, walking and fighting against odds. But you can only do this with the Spirit of God in you. And we see that we also have something to do. There is something we have to keep and to dress in our journey of being saved. So this is the chapter where I find this very interesting. This is the chapter where Eve is made from Adam's rib. So this is verse 22, and it says, Vayiven Adonai Elohim et ha-tzelah. Well, he built is the word here. Asher lakach min ha'adam leisha. So he took a rib and he built the woman. I think there's a kind of symbolism going on here. Now he takes the woman from the man, and it's telling us that the way of being for a woman is taken from man, meaning that for a woman to be able to know her purpose in life, of how she's supposed to be, is taken from either her father or her husband, not from her mother. Now, she gives birth later on, it's obvious, but Adam gets his instructions from God. Eve gets his instruction from Adam. This is the way God has put things up. Now, in our modern world, we know that this is not always the case, and we have things like feminism and men not keeping true to what they're supposed to be doing. But the way the Hebrew Bible, the way the Bible is giving us, is showing us that God has an order to things. And once we break this order is when we have chaos and anarchy. And Adam said, this is now the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So the unity of man and woman is the union or the institution of marriage, which is given by God. And in forming a new institution, a man and a woman will be separate from their parents and start a new home. Also something which is not very popular in today's culture. You have the in-laws always being busybodies a lot of times, and trying to have the say in the marriage. But the way God has put things up is that the man is head of his household, and he is the one who leads the wife for her to know how it is that she should be on her quest in becoming more like Yeshua. So let's take a quick look at chapter 3 in a minute. Now in chapter 3, we have the fall of mankind, which was induced by the snake. And it is written, now the snake or the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Now, a verse before we read, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Now, this word, to be naked and to be subtle or crafty, is the same word in the Hebrew, right? It is this word, arum, hayarum, and to be naked is the same word. Now, where's the connection? Naked and craftiness. Is there something in common? Actually, not directly, but the Hebrew is telling us something very specific. Now, it is something like, well, if we were crafty, we know nothing about it. We're naked. We're innocent, right? So the man and the woman were arum in the sense that they were naked, but they had no sense of being crafty or had no knowledge of evil because they had not eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil at this point. Now, the serpent was crafty or subtle or arum, and we read that the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. Hanachash ve'anachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh. Now, hasadeh, the field, is where we'll find Esau later on in the Bible. We know the story of Jacob and Esau, and this is where Esau will be found. He will be found in the field, hasadeh. Now, is there a connection? I think that the Hebrew Bible has given us a kind of transparency of where Esau's mindset comes from, right? It's not a godly mindset. So the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, and he said to the woman, now this is where Adam's sin kicks in. He lets his wife negotiate with the serpent, and he listens to his wife. So his punishment will be, God will say that because you listened to your wife. And this is where the order of things changed, right? This is where the woman started to, where the spirit of being dominant over the man came from, right? This is where disobedience started, because Eve was not given the instructions by God, it was Adam. So when Adam gives the instructions, the Torah, to his wife, it is as if Eve got them directly from God, because Adam is her representative for God. It says in the Bible that I'll make you an Elohim for your brother. Now, when Moses is Elohim for Aaron, Moses does not become God, but Moses is in the place of authority for Aaron, right? So it's the same thing here. Adam and Eve disobeyed, and she was tempted and deceived, but Adam was in blatant disobedience. So now, when they did what the serpent bade them to do, their eyes were opened and they ate of the tree, and they knew that they were naked. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And ki erumimhem, and then they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Now, this is very interesting. Now, the fig tree is a symbol for Israel in the Bible. Is used as a symbol for Israel. So why is the Bible telling us that they sewed fig leaves? What is the relevance in knowing what kind of leaves they were using to make themselves aprons? Well, this is the case with fallen man. Instead of turning to God, he hides from God, but he still pretends to be Israel. Okay? So the rebellion is in not listening, not hearkening to the voice, to the instructions of God, but he's still very religious. And we touched on this shortly in the introduction, that you may find some very unpleasant experiences waiting for you when you start dabbling into this so-called Hebrew roots movements. Now, not everything is bad, and not everyone has the same mindset, but by and large, you will find that there's often more a spirit of being religious than actually doing what Adonai has said to do. So now they hide from God, and this is a key point in Bereshit, that God comes looking for fallen mankind. And this is where the theme of salvation begins. God comes looking for rebellious mankind who is now taking on the nature of the serpent, which is being arum, crafty or naked, right? So the nakedness, the innocence, became craftiness. This is the transport that the Torah has given us. So he said, I was afraid and I heard your voice, and thus I hid from you. And then, God confronts man and woman, and then he metes out the punishment. Now, let me touch on some aspects very quickly. Now, the punishment to the serpent is this. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go. Now, this curse, cursed above all cattle, is this word arur. It's a strong word. This is a curse that God brings about. Now, a human being cannot do this, right? So, arur is the strong curse. Now, where does this curse lead to? What does it mean that something is cursed? Where does it end? Right? Now, a human being may make light of something. This is also a way of cursing in the Torah. When you insult somebody, you say somebody's a no-gooder, empty head, stupid, or foolish, or you make him light. That's the Hebrew concept. You're making light of something. So that's to curse somebody. But it is not the curse, well, it's a sin, but it is not the curse arur. This is a curse that God places or can place on something or someone. So ultimately, where does a curse lead to? Well, destruction. Okay, that's the short form and the by and large of what we're speaking of. When the curse is spoken out, then the person is doomed to destruction. So the serpent is doomed to destruction. But what is the curse? What is going to be the mode of life? Because the serpent is not going to die at this very moment. Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field, and this is the punishment. Upon thy belly shalt thou go. Now, where is the punishment in the serpent crawling or going on the belly? That's what a serpent does, right? I mean, a serpent crawls. Well, it's not exactly what the Hebrew text is saying. The Hebrew verse is saying, Al gichoncha telech, and this is the phrase, on your belly shall thou go. Look at this word here. On your belly, this is belly. Al gichoncha, on your belly. Cha. Telech is to walk. Look at the translation. The word telech is not to crawl, is to work. Now, a serpent cannot work because a serpent doesn't have feet. But the text is saying that the serpent will walk on its belly. And this is the curse. Now, the curse leads to destruction, and the mode of life of the serpent is that it will work on its belly. This means that the way of the serpent is going to be after its own inclination, right? Belly is a word in the New Testament which is used for somebody walking after his own lusts. Their God is their belly, good food, lusts, pleasure. It's a symbol. So walking on your belly is someone who's walking after his own lusts. And this leads to destruction. And this is the curse which was placed on the serpent. Now, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Now, the woman has no seed because the seed comes from the man, but this is prophetic that there will be a seed which will come from the woman, and it has to be a godless seed if it is not going to be the seed of man, obviously. Now, there will be enmity between the seed of the woman, between the godless seed and your seed. So, right from the onset, the Bible is telling us that Satan, the serpent, has seed. Now, what or who is the seed of Satan, and how does the seed of the devil go about its business? This is what we will touch upon in chapter 4. Now, Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, which means that to bear fruit is going to be a painful experience for the woman and as well as for the man, because it says, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. So the same mode is applicable to the man. In order to obtain fruit, he has to fight for it, right? It's going to be through pain and through struggles. Now, this holds true today. If you go out into the woods, no food is prepared for you in the forest. You have to fight for it. You have thorns, you have thistles, you have to plant and to harvest, and you go through a lot of pain before you actually can eat. So thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. And this is the punishment on the which all of humanity is living. But we have the great promise that the seed of the woman will one day come to crush the serpent's head. Now, there's something else going on here. It says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Now, the word heel is akev. And you probably have heard the name Jacob, which in the Hebrew means Yaakov, and you have the concept of the heel being in the name of Jacob. Now, there's a reason for this. Now, the concept of the serpent bruising the heel of the seed is that the serpent is trying to overthrow the seed. The serpent is trying to not just hold the seed up, but to destroy it. Now, in doing so, it's trying to grab onto his heel, which is what is going to happen in the case of Jacob and Esau. Jacob is holding onto Esau in trying to supplant his brother. He's doing it in a way, not just following on the heels of his brother, but in trying to overtake him, he's pulling him, he's pulling him at his heel. Now, the same thing is what the serpent is trying to do. In doing so, it shall bruise the heel, but shall get its head crushed in the long run, right? So this is what the serpent is doing right now. He's bruising the heel and trying to overcome the saints, in trying to disrupt a lot of things, in trying to bring a false knowledge of Torah, fighting about what the right pronunciation is of God's name and what Hebrew Bible we should be reading and which day is the Sabbath day, and we have to exclude these people because they do not know how to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. A lot of nonsense, but he's doing all of this and causing confusion, trying to overthrow the seed, but it shall have its head bruised or smashed at the end of the age. So this is the general census. This is the groundwork with which we will now look at what is going on in the seed of the serpent, which is Cain. We'll check that out in chapter 4. So this sets the stage for the introduction of the seed of God, which is found in Abel, and the seed of the serpent, which is found in Cain. So it says, and Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. Now names mean things in the Hebrew. Ve'adam yada et Chava ishto, he knew his wife, vataha, and she became pregnant, vateled, et Cain, vatomer kaniti ish, I have acquired a man, I bought. This is the idea behind Cain. She has received, that which was promised, was probably her way of thinking, which was promised in the Garden of Eden, that one day the seed will come from the woman to crush the serpent's head. Now, in the name she gave to his brother Abel, which means something like nothingness or vanity, she probably came to the conclusion that the seed was not going to come about that fast. Maybe she saw some traits in Cain, which gave an inkling that Cain could not be the promised Messiah. In any case, the seed of the woman is a prophetic understanding of Messiah, which was still to be brought about in the future at that point in time. So Abel was a keeper of sheep. How does Cain carry himself in this world? But Cain was a tiller of the ground. Now he has some kind of a connection to the earth, which was cursed. It's not that being a farmer was the sin, but his choice of profession is not a mere coincidence, right? So it says something about where his mindset was at. And in the process of time, this in the Hebrew says something different. Vayehi miketz yamin. Now, miketz yamin could mean something like in the end of days, miketz yamin. Could also mean in the process of time. But it seems that the Bible is saying this is how things will play out in all the time given to man. That there will always be enmity, as prophesied in chapter 3, between the seed of the woman, godless seed, and the seed of the serpent, which is Cain. So, in the end of days, the text seems to be saying that it's coming to a showdown between two seeds, because basically this is all we have. We have the seed of the serpent and the seed of God in all of humanity. These are the only options available to us. So how does Cain carry himself? Now, Cain is typically a man of religion, okay? Cain is found in, trying to bring an offering, not the proper one, not in the way that he is supposed to bring an offering, but he's in the business of bringing sacrifices, and he will name his children, or he will have the idea of God being present in the names he chooses for his children. I hope you understand where we are going with this. So the seed of the serpent, I think the Bible is telling us that, as the Pharisees and the Sadducees were very much against Yeshua, well, they were very religious people. And this is what you find in very many religious settings, right? So people are very religious, but they don't have the spirit of Messiah. And this is because they have chosen not to, right? So this was a choice that Cain took. Upon correction, he doesn't have any intention of amending his ways. And it says that Cain brought the fruit of the ground and offering to the Lord. Now this word offering is the word mincha. You find it right here. Mincha is actually in Leviticus chapter 2 a wheat or flour offering. It's not a burnt sacrifice. But the idea is that when Abel brings his mincha, his offering, right? It's the same word mincha, as you can see. So the idea is that what a mincha is supposed to represent is what these two presented before Adonai. So Cain brought the fruit of the ground, a mincha. Now the mincha is something that you sift, right? It is flour, and it is very finely sifted flour, which is sifted over and over again. And it is an activity that reflects somebody sifting through his own psyche, right? His own spirit, his own soul. In trying to become like Yeshua, he is continually sifting. And this is the idea of the mincha. So in bringing a mincha, there's a spiritual idea behind it. It's not so much about it being a burnt offering or that Cain brought the wrong sacrifice because he brought the fruit of the ground. No, this is what he brought from his own profession. Now, the problem was his mindset, okay? So this is the reason why God had no respect to Cain's offering. His mindset in connection with sacrifice was very wrong. So unto Cain and unto his offering, God had no respect, and Cain became angry and he slays his brother. We know the story. But Cain is offered a way out of this situation. If thou dost well, shalt thou not be accepted, and if thou dost not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. So there is a prospect of ruling over sin, of overcoming, if one is obedient. But Cain chooses to do something else. He kills his own brother. Now the idea is that in doing so, he gets rid of any evidence of somebody being able to follow Messiah. And that is how he quiets his own conscience. Now, of course, God sees this and he pronounces a judgment on Cain. And this is the first time we hear of a human being cursed, right? So we have this word again, arur, as you can see in the text. Thou art cursed from the earth, which we read. Arur, cursed was the serpent, and this curse is now on Cain. Has nothing to do with being born by the name of Cain, is that which brought about the curse. His mindset and attitude and his relation to God is what makes him cursed. So there is a curse on the ways of Cain, right? Not necessarily does it mean that all the offspring of Cain will be cursed, but Cain himself was the first man in the Bible on which a curse was pronounced. So the seed of the serpent, cursed by God, just as the serpent is cursed, has no relationship, no covenant with God, but he still pretends his bearings may relay that he has a relationship to God. And God set a mark upon Cain, Ot, and Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, which means to wander. So he's a vagabond. And Cain knew his wife, and Ba Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after his son Enoch. And this is the lineage of Cain. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael. And in this name, Mehujael, you will see the name of God, El, tagged on to the name. So he has no relationship to God, but he still has the name El in his generations. And this gives you to understand that the man who was pronounced on himself to be enemies with God does not necessarily reject being religious, okay? And we had the example of the Pharisees and the Sadducees being very religious people, but being very much so against Yeshua. So the spirit of being religious is going to be found in the seed, in the lineage of Cain. And then we have all kinds of things going on in the lineage of Cain. We have polygamy, and we have the lineage being very industrious and successful. Well, of course, when you have nothing more to do in relation to the worship of Adonai, what else is there to do than to be prosperous and to, have one's fill of the earth and of goods which can be acquired by being industrious and being sharp about your business and having other goals than having the goal of being joined to the Messiah. So they're not poor, they're not stupid, they know how to handle the harp and the organ, and being very skilled in brass and iron, but it is the cut of lineage, and we hear nothing more of Cain after this episode. So I think that this is showing the stage of what is going to take place between these two seeds. Now we have the lineage going on from Seth, because we now have a replacement for the brother which Cain slew, which was Abel, and Seth takes the place of Abel. He is going to be the placeholder for the lineages to come down the generations from which Messiah will one day come from, because we are still waiting for this prophetic fulfillment of the seed coming from the woman, which is Yeshua. Now, the Torah portion goes on to verse 8, chapter 6, and we'll be introduced to Noah. So, Noah is the 10th from Adam, and God is going to start bringing about his plans of salvation through the lineage of Noah. So something happens in the introduction of Noah's time, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they choose. Now there's some strange doctrine going about saying that these sons of God were spirit beings, and there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, saying that the sons of God were angels, and this had relations with the daughters of men, and they brought about some Nephilim, which simply means fallen ones in the Hebrew. And this was sort of alien type of humans, and this is where God had to pull the brakes. So this is, in my view, absolute nonsense. The text is saying that the godly seed starts to mix with the fallen seed. And it is this mixture that brings about all the chaos. Now, it is like a cycle within a cycle when we're speaking of creation and salvation. And this is where God will step in, and it repents the Lord that he made the earth, and he's going to bring about the flood. We will take a deeper look into Noah and the flood and this concept of the genealogies when we get to the Torah portion of Noah. I hope this made a little sense. This is supposed to be a short commentary. We could spend hours and maybe even days and weeks on going through the text, looking all through the Hebrew words, but this is supposed to be a short overview of what the Torah is holding in store for us. Hope this was a pleasure for you. Until next time, Shalom.